Good afternoon. I'm Craig Copeland. I'm the Director of Wealth Benefits Research here at the Employee Benefit Research Institute. Today, we're going to go over the results from the 2024 Retirement Confidence Survey that eBRE does in collaboration with Greenwald Research. Again, this is our 34th year of doing this survey. So I want to introduce our speakers first. As I said, I'm Craig Copeland. My distinguished panel will be Lisa Greenwald, CEO of Greenwald Research, and Peter Capinos of Empower, where he's the head of workplace and investment marketing. And Empower is actually one of our sponsors that we would like to thank for making the 2024 RCS possible. As you can see, here are the rest of our organizations that helped us develop the survey, review the questions, and provide us with this excellent survey. And Peter will be able to provide us some excellent industry insight into the results we get from the survey. Today, we are going to present the survey in a topical manner. So there will be one or two of us that will speak on each topic to give both the survey results and industry insight into that particular topic. So we'll be going along through that. But we do want to leave time at the end to give people an opportunity to ask questions. We do that by looking at the chat button down at the bottom. You can see a little chat that's circled here on this slide. You click on that, and then the window will pop up, and you type in where it says "to all panelists" your question, and we'll get to the questions at the end of the survey presentation. So let's get started on the survey results. First of all, I want to take you through the overview. Again, this is the longest running survey of its kind on retirement confidence about retirement. This has been a project that's been done with both eBRE and Greenwald Research. The 2024 survey was conducted in January of this year, from the 2nd to the 31st. We interviewed 2,500 Americans, roughly split between workers and retirees. This year, we did an oversample of people from the military. We're actually going to have a report that's going to be out in July that focuses on that particular population. Today, we're going to be talking about the general results from the survey, the traditional results of the overall national sample. Because we take all the results that we have, we weight them by age, sex, military status, household income, and race and ethnicity. So we have nationally represented responses. And assuming this was a completely random survey, we would see what the standard error is for both workers and retirees here. So it'd be roughly 3 percentage points for the difference. So we will start with the first topic of retirement confidence, unsurprising, since that's the name of our survey. So let's look at how retirement confidence has come out this year compared to the previous years. So first of all, we can see that retirement confidence went down for workers in 2023. We had one of the largest percentage point declines since 2008, 2009. You see it kind of trended up, but that was not a statistically significant increase. It's heading in the right direction. But even if it was statistically significant, we have not reached back to what we were in 2022. Again, that was January 22. So that a lot of that impact was the high inflation rate that we had during 2022 into January 2023. Because again, all these surveys have been done in January from year to year so that we have results that are consistent between the years. We could also see the same type of result for retirees. It was flat again, and it hasn't reached back to the high that they had in 2021. But we still see for both workers and retirees relatively high level of confidence. We saw 68% for workers. We see 74% for retirees are either very or somewhat confident that they will have enough money to live comfortably throughout retirement. So it's still pretty optimistic about their retirement prospects, even though they weren't as optimistic as they were a few years ago. But they do have concerns, and we can kind of see the different concerns that workers have. Unsurprisingly, the two of the three top ones are having to do with cost. The increased cost of living making it harder to save as much money as they want, or that inflation will stay high for the next 12 months are two of the top three among workers. The other one is they're concerned about the U.S. government making significant changes to the American retirement system. So the workers appear to be concerned that there's going to be some changes away from the system that they have now. And what is interesting is when we ask retirees the same question, we get the same top three. However, 1 and 3 are reversed, but overall the same 3 concerns that retirees also have, except they have inflation will stay high for the next 12 months at number 1, and add the increasing cost of living for number 3, where still number 2 is the U.S. government makes significant changes to the retirement system. So both workers and retirees seem to be concerned that they're going to go away from what they have. So what they know and what they have prepared for, they're concerned that might change. So therefore, you need to be taking account of that if any changes are going to be made, because people are expecting that system to have and grown used to that system and have built their retirements based upon that system. So now I want to hand it off to Peter, who will go give us some more in what he's seen through Empower on retirement confidence.
Thanks, Craig, and thanks for everybody for joining us today. I thought we spent a few minutes going over some research from Empower that highly complements and dovetails everything that you're seeing today from eBree, starting with some of the numbers that you see on screen. This is an annual study that Empower does, which we call Empowering America's Financial Journey. So where Empower serves over 18 million individuals, we took a snapshot of about 4 million people to see savings and investing behavior. But then we survey over them to see kind of what are the attitudes, what are the reasons why they're doing what they're doing. As you see on the screen in front of you, the 68 is the very same number that Craig represented for eBree's research on retirement confidence. But we've layered into this some additional findings on generations as well as gender. So let's talk about those for just a second. As you can see, the retirement confidence for younger generations is a little higher than that for the average American. And much of that, I think we can all agree, probably attributed to the longer lens that folks have when you're a Gen Z or a millennial. Oh, right next to that, though, you see the numbers around gender. And if you've looked at a lot of this data historically, you know that this is probably not a surprise. Men outpace women in terms of retirement confidence. When we look at overall preparedness, it is higher. But that is less of an issue of coverage or savings rates, where in fact women oftentimes save at higher rates than men, but it's a lifelong career earnings number. So sometimes as we go through these numbers, when you look at retirement confidence, people aren't just saving within a vacuum. They're looking at broader expectations around their savings. So we do another study, and it's all part of Empower's research program, part of a program that we call The Currency. On the next page is a view, if you could advance one, to a different lens that we put on this same research, which is to ask people. I think most of you probably, if you were in the retirement business, this buzzword of financial wellness is top of mind right now. But the average worker doesn't think about themselves as necessarily being financially well. So we framed it a little differently. We asked about the topic of financial happiness, which is to say, in the context of your overall savings, what does financial happiness mean to you? And what you see on screen is some of the words that come top to mind. It's freedom. It's about being debt-free. It's about security. So while this webcast is about retirement confidence, sometimes it helps to look in the environment that surrounds what the people live in financially. So on the next page is a little bit more about what makes up the idea of financial happiness. Call it the right adjacent to retirement confidence is the whole concept of financial happiness. And when we ask people, what do you think will make you financially happy? Where do you feel like you'll be content with where you are financially? It's less about necessarily when folks are given a wide array of options, the context of paying bills on time and in full is number one. Being debt-free, slightly behind that. Being able to enjoy small luxuries with family, let's say a vacation or something like that, without having to worry about it. So there's a list here of priorities of outside necessarily the scope of retirement. What else is really important here? So let me turn it back to, as we continue to talk about other aspects of confidence.
Thanks, Peter. Happy to take everyone through these. So there are obviously different components of overall retirement confidence. I'm going to share some of our longstanding trend questions on those with you. This is for our workers. Confidence that you'll have enough to take care of basic expenses, 76% confident, got it covered. Confidence that you'll have enough for your medical expenses. 2/3 of our workers say they've got that covered, at least mentally. And then 62% each feeling like they'll have enough money to last their entire life. And 62% saying that it will be enough money to keep up with the cost of living and inflation. Now, two really important things also on this slide. You know, the percent who feel very confident is quite small, right? By comparison, most people here are in that somewhat zone, right? And importantly, we see that 2/3 of our workers feel at least somewhat confident that they have done a good job preparing financially for retirement. But that's only 3 in 10 who feel very confident they've done a good job. And that 3 in 10, that 29% is up slightly from where it was last year. Now, on the next slide, when we look at our retirees, everything sort of scales up, right? So even down at the bottom, what was 6 in 10, having enough money to keep up with the cost of inflation, it was 6 in 10 among our workers. It's 7 in 10 among our retirees. So everything here is a little bit higher for our retirees. 82% feeling confident they'll be able to cover basic expenses, a little more than 3/4 feeling confident they'll have enough to take care of medical expenses. 7 in 10 feeling like they'll have enough money to last their entire life. And still 72% of retirees feeling like they did a good job preparing financially for retirement, but still only about 1/3 feeling very confident that they did a good job preparing for retirement. And maybe those who aren't doing such a good job, at least not yet, might be on the next slide, because retirement savings right now is not necessarily a priority for everyone. So here we're seeing about 1/3 of our workers agreeing with the statement that retirement's not a priority relative to my other current needs, right? And 1/4 of retirees say the same. It's not a priority relative to my other needs. So there are a variety of reasons why retirement savings wouldn't be someone's top priority. And on the next slide, probably one of the biggest is debt. So nearly half of our workers agree that their debt is negatively impacting their ability to save for retirement. I think very importantly, however, nearly 1/4 of our retirees say debt is negatively impacting their ability to live comfortably in retirement, right? So that is one of probably many other financial demands and savings needs that is interfering with retirement savings. And debt is certainly a big one, but not the only one. And Peter's going to show us a little bit more about the other priorities facing workers.
Yeah, so we asked, thanks, Lisa. We asked to put a slightly different lens on this, which was, and I used the term earlier, financial wellness, right? You know, people's decisions about what to save for retirement, how to save retirement is oftentimes sort of clouded or competing with other financial goals. So we asked workers, you know, what are your other financial priorities? And we broke it down by generation. Some of these probably logically make sense. And the legend that you see there in the pale gray represents all generations. And then you've got baby boomers, you know, coming across from left to right, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. So as we look at this, you know, 74%, not a surprise to anyone, probably the baby boomers are keenly saving for retirement. It is an immediately ahead of them. And then it drops off from there. A couple of items here that, you know, maybe are a little bit surprising is when you look at the millennial stat in terms of saving for retirement, which is in the hashed navy. I think about millennials are now, you know, hitting over 40, 42 is the top end. So that number is certainly creeping up. I suppose the takeaways on this slide for those of you who are responsible for employee benefits is that you've got a lot of competing priorities. And if you don't solve for the things outside of retirement, people aren't maybe going to defer or save at the rates they probably should. So, I look at it from the lens of, if I'm a younger worker, if you look at that Gen Z stat in that first bar chart, using the word retirement over and over to a Gen Z person from a communication standpoint simply may not resonate. If you can put it in the broader context of helping people to feel like they're having more money set aside for longer term goals, if you can talk about it as a savings focus in the manage, it might have more response, speaking as a marketer, than perhaps focusing on the pure retirement message. The other piece of this, and we're seeing this real time at Empower, is if you combine the retirement plan with other goals. So for example, if you have financial wellness programs where your retirement plan is the centerpiece, but you can weave in other messaging, your chances are that you'll get people who are maybe a little bit more confident when they feel like they're in more control over their competing financial goals. We're seeing just that. We rolled out a different dashboard view of our participant website where people can link accounts, they can create a budget, they know what their spending versus savings is. That group of individuals are saving 30% more than perhaps those who aren't using those types of tools. So the other message of this on the next page is around, and we took another study, which is available on our website. We'll point you to that in a little bit later, is one that we call Time is Money. And it's about this idea of, how do you look at future planning? How do you look back on perhaps how you spent your progress so far? And then perhaps the message of what do you think your time is worth? Spoiler alert, people think on average their hourly wage should be coming in at about $240 an hour, which puts you at a pretty high number. That's $500,000 annually. But we also ask questions about where do you fear about running out of money? Half of people are concerned about running out of time, even though 43% say that they probably started at about the right time. 43% saying they wish they could do a look back, a do-over, and get started a little earlier. The center dial may be a little bit surprising as we look at it. As we look at retirement, there is approximately 48% of people say they would rather have a longer retirement, but perhaps with less money, trade-off, maybe a lower living standard. So have a longer retirement, but with less money. It's kind of a split. So an interesting shift on the focus about retirement confidence. People are saying, I could get by with less so long as I could spend more in retirement. So Craig, I'll turn it to you to talk about the transition to retirement.
Thank you, Peter. Really, we're going to be looking at retirement ages, why people decided to retire when they did retire. And first of all, one thing on this slide, we can compare the expected retirement age versus the actual retirement ages of retirees. The one thing that's interesting is that workers have a median expected retirement age of 65 versus the median actual retirement age of retirees of 62. This has been a long-standing number that we found for 10 to 20 years back that it's really stayed. It's been very sticky at 65 for expected age for workers and actual age of 62. You can see the distribution that it changes a little bit around those numbers. Like in particular, you can see that there was an increase this year in the percentage of workers that say that they would retire at 65. It went up from 23% to 28. But the median still came up at 65 of when workers expect to retire, and the 62 for the age for those that actually did retire. And you still see a pretty high percentage of people that retired in their 50s. And why is that? Well, one thing that we have consistently also found is that people actually are retiring earlier than they planned. We see that this has been pretty consistent that nearly 50% of retirees have retired earlier than planned. It's jumped around 49, 48, down a little bit lower, but it's been right near 50% that have retired earlier than planned. So we've asked, well, why did you retire earlier than planned? And we can see that there's various reasons. There's some very good positive reasons. There's about 2 in 5 of retirees said that they retired earlier than planned because they could afford to. It was a decision that they want to do, that they were in a situation where that they could go to other things. So all these retiring early is not a bad thing. There were some people that made this choice because they could, they want to do something else because they had the financial capabilities. However, we also see that there was a number of reasons that were not on the positive side. They're on the negative side, such as there were changes at their company, such as downsizing, reorganization, that they had a health problem or a disability, or their skills were no longer required. And we put all those together, that's 69% of the retirees that retired earlier cited these reasons. And again, people could cite more than one reason. So there were some people evidently that cited both good and bad reasons, but both could have happened, but they could have retired because they could afford to. And that final decision was maybe something that happened to their employer. But there is still this possibility that people aren't going to be able to work as long as they want to. And particularly, it's going to be even harder for them to continue to work either later and later than the 60s because of things that happen at their company and not being able to sustain their health. There's also additional that they may have to care for their spouse. Caregiving can become a very big issue. And you can see that roughly 13% of retirees cited this as for the reason they retired earlier than planned. So there is a number of things that can go on that can change this dynamic of going into retirement. But one thing that we also do see is that workers aren't expecting to stop working completely. They expect to gradually transition, reduce their hours, trying to figure out what they're going to do before they retire. However, this hasn't what we ended up seeing in the past. We see that retirees said 3/4 of retirees actually said they had full stop. But maybe things are changing. We see things that are changing because people can work longer now because there's more opportunities to work desk jobs than there were 20, 30 years ago. So maybe they will be able to more transition into retirement and really think about what they want to do and how they're going to retire. It may not be forced upon them. They may have more options. And I'm going to head over to Peter to talk about more of what people may be thinking about when they're thinking about when they actually retire.
Thanks, Craig. And we'll come back to in a few minutes. We've got some other findings about what that work and retirement looks like in another study that we did. But maybe pausing here a second to ask the question about overall confidence, and do people feel like they're ready for retirement? And you can see shaded here and for the legend here, earlier than planned, as planned, I will delay, or I will never be able to feel like I will never be able to retire. So some highlights of what you're seeing here. For men, that number is 38. If you look at the number as you scroll across, 38% saying that they will probably delay or never be able to retire. That number is dramatically higher for women, with over half saying they will delay or simply not be able to retire at all. The number here that's a little troubling for me is 23%, almost a quarter of women saying that they will not be able to, or at least they feel like they will not be able to retire. That number drops down quite a bit. The time is on your side. For boomers and Gen X, that number is at 49, so about half. So not exactly a rosy picture, but at least better than perhaps some of the folks who are actually closer to retirement. So let's add another dimension to this on the next slide, which is taking a look at people for where they think they are now versus where perhaps they were a year ago. In some ways, Greg, in the same ways that you presented data earlier, like where they were versus where they are now. We asked the question where you think you would retire versus what that number is. So a year out, the number's a little longer, 60 versus 63 years old. The one thing I do want to kind of spend attention to, and it's always, kind of message of read the fine print. It's a little bit smaller number here on this page. But if you look at 12 months ago versus now, the average place where people anticipate retiring has gone from 60 to 63. But look a couple of lines down. We asked in this survey a similar question in the financial happiness survey of, have people done any financial planning? Do you have a financial plan of any sort? Is it detailed, or have you really not done much there? When you look at the number, whether it's 12 months ago, people who don't have a financial plan or less detailed one are 5 years later in terms of when they expect to retire. Today, that number, while it's 63 on average, people who with a less detailed financial plan are pushing it out a full 7 years later. So the landscape changes quite significantly depending on where you are in that planning cycle. If we go to the next page, though, the other thing is about sort of what does retirement look like? And Craig, picking up on some of the notes that you mentioned earlier ago, we in our study last year asked this question about sort of, for both current employees and those closest to retirement, what do you think about working in retirement? Is that the new trend where you used to get a gold watch and then you felt like you spent every day at the senior center? That is no longer the case. If you look at the numbers here, 58% of people are saying, hey, when I retire, I'm open to work. 20% saying, not sure, that's a possibility. So you've got a strong majority of people saying it likely might be a hybrid sort of, I'm still working. The numbers as to why are right on the screen in front of you. If you read through these, it's number one about personal fulfillment. So I feel like I'm getting satisfaction about a job that I enjoy. Financial need, which would encompass, things like benefits that come with that, is a strong number two. To have a daily routine, that I've got something to get out of bed every day for, a sense of purpose, are all stacked right here in front of you. Also noted in this is the notion of, and perhaps in today's world, the notion of remote work is a much more a possibility. And that is really making this appealing to individuals who perhaps want to be a snowboarder or do other things where working remote would make this a lot more interesting or a lot more palatable as you get into retirement. So with that as backdrop, Lisa, do you want to talk a little bit about life in retirement?
Sure. Well, understanding that about half of our retirees retired earlier than they expected, always good to see what they're saying life and finances are like in retirement. And here you can see our retiree respondents telling us about their expenses, both overall and in a few key categories. And this year, what we've found is a little more than half of our retirees say their overall expenses and spending is at least somewhat higher than they expected it to be. The categories that are, notably higher healthcare or dental expenses. And I'll pause there because there's some nuance to these bottom bars. Long-term care expenses and support or help of a family member. If we were to rebase that and take the not applicables out of the picture, long-term care expenses and supporting a family member rise into positions 2 and 3. So when it happens and it is higher than expected. One thing that we did see, one of the few statistically significant changes this year was retirees saying their travel, entertainment, and leisure expenses were much higher than expected. But in terms of the rank order of things, healthcare and dental expenses is most likely to be higher than expected. And then when it happens, those long-term care expenses as well. However, despite higher than expected expenses, and that also goes along with Craig's earlier slide, retirees worried about inflation, certainly, so are our workers. But on the next slide, we still see that 67%, nearly 7 in 10 retirees, at least some would agree that they're having the retirement lifestyle that they envisioned. Even more than that, say that they are spending money how they want to within reason. They don't feel too constrained, which was to Peter's earlier point about financial happiness and freedom. And relatively few are sort of holding back or pulling back on their spending in the hopes of leaving an inheritance or a legacy for heirs. So on the whole, our retirees say that things are going relatively well despite higher expenses. There are always pockets of our population for whom this is not the lived experience, but on the whole, we have majorities living a retirement lifestyle they envision. And on the next slide, we asked if that lifestyle, and the question wording we've kept very consistent over the years and through the pandemic, right? Including working and volunteering and time with family? Is your lifestyle in retirement overall better, the same, or worse than you expected? And you can see that we actually saw a significant increase in the number of retirees saying it is much better than expected. However, the plurality of 47% say it is right in line with what they expected, right? And right in line with what they envisioned. Two bites of the same apple. So life and retirement, even those who entered retirement with debt, entered retirement with less than what the industry said they should have saved, is going as expected. And I am going to hand it off to Craig to talk about where people are getting their info from.
Yes, we've talked a lot about various decisions that people have made, but where are they getting the information for the decisions they are making? Well, first of all, there's a healthy percentage of both workers and retirees don't know where to get good financial and retirement advice. We could see 36% agree with the statement, strongly or somewhat agree with the statement that they do not know where to go for financial advice. And you can see that a similar number of that is workers down at 20%, also don't know where to go for good financial retirement advice. But where do they go when they are looking for it? Well, we can see for workers, first, the most prevalent one cited is family and friends. If it's not there, it's online resources and research they do on their own. Those are the top two things that they cite. A professional personal advisor doesn't come in till the third, even though it's just slightly below that, as another source of information. So really for workers, they're really looking for things that they can do on their own before they're going to the professional advisors. But also, if you look at number 4 or 5, that is also the workplace is another big place to do that. Either information directly from their employer or from representative of the workplace retirement plan are in there at 4 and 5 as the next sources of information. So there is a wide variety of sources of information that workers are using. Some of it may be good and some of it may be bad, particularly depending on how good your friends are with finances and how well you do research. So there is still a lot of work that has to be done to really find out what information they're getting and what they're using. But we do see that there is, use of financial advisors and what's provided by their employer as well. So there are other sources that people can have that have some vetting to them that will help them apply to better or be provided better information so they can make better decisions. When you see this same type of things here for retirees where they're going, the personal professional advisor is clearly the top source of information. So, and one of the things you could see is as people get older, they're more likely to be using a personal and professional advisor. And again, that's because they're more likely to have income. They have more decisions that they need to make, and therefore they're more likely to get professional help. And again, you do see at 2 and 3 that there is online research and friends and family. And then there's still people that have looked for information from their workplace that they use for their retirement information. So it's still, we get those same 5 things that come through, but we do get a little more professional advisor use for those in retirees. So I am going to hand it off to Peter to talk more about this topic.
Thanks, Craig. And I want to sort of start by reinforcing this notion about advice and planning and coaching. Here's yet another study that Empower conducted, which we called Who's the Boss?, where we asked questions about sort of what's most important to you from your employer. And there were questions about, is it compensation? Do you want the C-suite? What do you want in benefits? And that's all part of that study. But calling out a couple of things here, 44%, 2 and 5, saying that they wish their employer offered more one-on-one financial help. Approximately the same number, they're just not getting enough. For those of you who have tried to calculate, that matching, how much of an incentive is it for whether it's recruiting or for employees to save more? 71%, nearly 3 out of 4, saying the retirement plan matching is one of the top benefits that you have. Auto enrollment also topping the list here. So on this notion of, and to piggyback on some points that you made a little earlier, Craig, we also took a lens on not just where do people turn to for advice, but this dichotomy of who's trusted and who do I go to? Because sometimes the answers aren't always the same. On the next page is what we found. So you have this hierarchy. We can just jump one more. There we go. We asked the question of trusted or valued versus who you actually consulted. So sometimes your intentions don't necessarily align with your actions, or sometimes accessibility is the issue. Pick one. So as we kind of go through in the sky blue are trusted and valued, and I think similar, Craig, to the numbers that you had earlier, a licensed professional financial advisor tops the list, followed by retirement provider, online tools, and family coming in close, tied for third. The friends number dropped down a bit differently in our study. I think we broke it out from family and friends in one bucket. I was happy to see that social media didn't necessarily show up top of that list. But what you also see, though, is the numbers of people who have actually consulted takes a different priority. You can see here that as you look at the numbers going down in the navy blue, it doesn't necessarily start with a full financial advisor. Oftentimes online tools, retirement provider, family, a financial advisor coming in fourth. So that the priorities or the order of them isn't necessarily the same if you look at who you trust versus who you're actually going to. So as we look at kind of how workplace plays into this all, you see some numbers on the next page in terms of like, what's the outcome? If I get advice, if I have a financial plan, what is the outcome? What does that do to your overall picture? Number one, 78% saying a good financial plan would help me reach my goals in life. People recognize that if they have some sort of a plan, they will be better on track to reach their goals. Number two, and this is a pretty important one, is, and on the screen here in front of you, is this idea of I have a sense for my goals, or I'm just not sure how to achieve them. I wish I had gotten advice sooner. I haven't gotten the advice that I need. But shaded here across the bottom yellow, and we can see this repeatedly, is that people believe their employer, their workplace, has a responsibility to help with financial planning, especially for organizations with 401k options. So people feel like, and when we look at the numbers over the longer term, something like 50% of the average worker's accumulated wealth comes from a workplace plan. Therefore, people feel like if that's where my nest egg is, and maybe that's where the planning should come from as well. So, some other benefits, just looking at, we asked people, those who have access to advice versus those who are perhaps do-it-yourselfers who haven't turned there yet. On the next page is some of the high-level findings. You can see shaded in purple those working with an advisor versus those who perhaps have not done so yet. The level of confidence or retirement readiness is a lot higher. The percentage of people feeling like they might be able to afford to retire early, or at least as planned, is significantly higher. Their comfort with the investment decisions that they've made, their overall financial health. The fact that folks at least feel a level of confidence that the decisions that they're making are based on good education, good outlook, like they've actually thought through them, can't be understated. So I'm going to turn it to Lisa to wrap up and talk a little bit about the lens of retirement income, which ultimately is where all these plans are headed.
Yeah, so let's talk about how they're going to use those plan savings to fund retirement. And first and foremost, we asked our workers, again, they're of all ages here, what do you plan to do with the money in your DC retirement savings plan? And it's really split. I mean, we still see roll it into an IRA at 41%, sort of taking the lead, but then you've got these split options at 3 and 10. I think most importantly for many of us, we see 3 and 10 saying they plan to purchase a product that guarantees income for life with those savings. And on the next slide, that number looks even bigger. We have 83% at least somewhat interested in purchasing a guaranteed income product with those retirement savings. Though it's about 3 and 10, or third, very interested. Hold on to that number because it comes back, that 3 and 10 who said they wanted to purchase guaranteed lifetime income. This 3 in 10 who are very interested in guaranteed lifetime income is a number that sort of repeats in our findings when it comes to income solutions with DC plan assets. On the next slide, if an income solution is not going to help people withdraw, then sort of do they have enough confidence to DIY it? This is among all of our workers and all of our retirees. So 63% of our workers are confident. They know how much to withdraw in retirement from their savings. Not all that different than 69% of retirees who are living it and doing it and feel at least somewhat confident. But the very confidents are smaller. 2 in 10 workers very confident that they're going to know how to withdraw from their assets in retirement. And 25% of retirees who are doing it very confident that they know how much to withdraw. And it's complicated. This 21%, this 25%, yes, maybe I believe them, but this hedging of somewhat confident, I think it's reasonable to have your doubts, because on the next slide, you can see, especially for workers, how varied and complicated they expect these sources of income to be, right? If you look at the retirees, the purple bars, there are 4 sources of income where more than 50% say that it will be a major or minor source of income for them, right? Social Security at the top. Personal retirement savings or investments follows that. A DB or traditional pension follows that, and then it's followed by an IRA, right? It's a little more concentrated. Those are the ones with 50% or higher. Look at the ones at 50% or higher for our workers. They're expecting income from a whole variety of sources. The top ones are largely the same. Social Security, though then instead of personal retirement savings and investments, we see the workplace DC plan at 84%. But they also are expecting income from a lot more non-traditional sources. They expect there to be income from work, 73%. And they expect there's going to be income from home equity and real estate and rental properties, 55%. 42% of them think that they're going to have a source of income coming from family and friends. So it's a complex web that these workers are trying to anticipate of where that income is going to come from. And they also think it's going to come from a product that guarantees income for life. And I'm going to close there, hand it off to Craig, and I think we're opening things up for discussion.
First, we're going to Peter to give us a little background on his studies.
Yeah, so thanks, Craig. And a couple of you asked in the chat, where do we get some of the additional studies that were referenced? There is a note here on screen about the currency. So Empower in the last couple of years have put together a site on empower.com/the-currency, where you can access findings like Empowering America's Financial Journey, which is that compendium of the behaviors of 4 million individuals overlaid with surveys as to why they do it. The time is money, who's the boss. A variety of these studies and findings are there. You can also sign up if you choose to do so for our weekly newsletter, where we drip things in market, trying to tie together the concepts of money, life, work, and play, so that financial topics don't just get viewed as purely financial literacy, they're tied to your day-to-day life. So again, empower.com/the-currency.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Now we will go discussion. I've received a number of questions in the chat, so please go ahead and put more on there. I will start off. The first question to me, since it was about something I presented, is I talked about the government people being concerned about changes to the government. Someone asked what particular changes to the system. Unfortunately, we did not do a follow-up question, but I think we've seen that for a couple of years in a row that there is concern about the federal government making changes to the system. And that seems like a good question for next year to really dig down on what particular changes they are interested in. So I think that's something important going forward. On a question for Lisa about the spending higher. Do you think it was spending higher because they could spend higher? So that was what, or as opposed to the cost actually being higher?
I think given the way the question is wording, the safer bet is our respondents were answering because the cost is higher than they expected. Though I saw that comment, and I think it could be really interesting in future years, you know, whether it's an agree, disagree, or something on that type of scale, to see if people are spending more because they feel like they have the financial freedom to spend more. But I think that question was most likely the way it was worded, answered in terms of the cost is high.
But I think the follow-up question that you presented, where that they could spend within reason, may give you some of it could potentially be that they could.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. Peter, someone asked you about the tools and the higher savings from those that use tools. It was more of a chicken and egg question on whether people save more because of tools or those that save more are more likely to use tools. Have you been able to try to really look at the differences between that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, you know, one could make the argument that those who are more prepared and engaged are likely to use the tools. Those who use the tools end up being better prepared. It is a little bit of a chicken egg. That's why I think when I look at it's incumbent upon us to promote and get them in and using these programs. I think too often our industry has looked at, okay, it's financial literacy, we'll make it available and they will come. Yeah, I do think when you look at, and there was another question, Craig, about what stats were most interesting, and it ties into this notion of planning. Some of the stats and numbers, when asked individually, like there was a stat in the EBRD research again, where 61% of people think that they will be getting pension proceeds in retirement. In the Empower study, people think that their average wage should be about $240 an hour. So until people have actually taken pen to paper and actually put together a plan, they're not going to see the whole thing together. So back to the original question, I think I'll say it doesn't matter, but if we can get people to use this, whether they're naturally inclined to do it, or if we can nudge them to put together a plan, that's where we hit the numbers that we need to.
Thank you. Another question is kind of a typical question. I think we'll start with Lisa on what the most surprising thing you found about the results, and if there's anything that you saw, Peter, as well, you could chime in after Lisa.
I don't think it's new, but it is something that I've taken sort of a renewed interest in this year, is that sort of retiree health and those persistent sort of positive assessments, subjective positive assessments of how retirement's going for them. In years past, it was sort of easy to say, oh, well, these are all retirees who have DB plans. And when the DB plans go away, retirees are going to be miserable. And that really hasn't happened. And so I think for me, the persistency of retirees sort of suggesting in more qualitative, relative ways that they're doing okay is one of the more important findings that I've been honing in on.
Yeah, I think, you know, Craig, you know, you asked I framed it a little differently earlier. I think there's a number of sort of reality numbers that people maybe don't wrap their heads around. You know, that pension number to me is scary, that nearly 2/3 of people think that they're eligible for pension. We all know what that number actually is. You know, the one more recently that I think is interesting, and it speaks to the trends in the marketplace, about over 2/3, 67% of people thinking that their employer should be providing them some sort of financial planning or coaching, which if you think about how the workplace has evolved over time, that was not an expected benefit, let's say 10 or 15 or so years ago. There was another one that comes to mind, is that question that we had about spending more years in retirement with less money, or fewer years in retirement with more money? Like, where's the trade-off? The almost 50-50 split. People are willing to give up the standard of living just to spend more years in retirement. I thought was an interesting and perhaps a somewhat surprising finding.
Another question I had, which goes to something I presented, was why is that expected retirement age still seem to be anchored at 65 instead of moving out towards 67? And I think the reason is still that's the Medicare age, because that's the big cliff benefit. You know, you can get Social Security starting at 62, you at least get something, but you have to wait to 65 to get Medicare or nothing. So that's really kind of the first age that people could probably feel comfortable retiring. And I think that's still the anchor, and people still believe 65 is that key age. While 67 is now clearly the Social Security normal retirement age for pretty much everyone left in I think everyone left in the workforce under 65, that would seem like it would be something that would be the new anchor. But it really seems with that Medicare benefit, that's still at 65. I think to really move that number up, you would have to have a change in when Medicare eligibility starts. And so that's, I think, why they still have that 65 instead of 67. I wanted to go back to what Peter talked about, because there's a question about the financial priorities. So how do plan sponsors, consultants put together a package that frames financial well-being benefits among the other priorities for employees for their happiness?
So maybe I'll jump in and Lisa as well weigh in. You know, I think a lot of this is thinking about your employee population, depending on the industry that you're in. You know, those of you who are benefits managers or consultants on this call, you know your employee populations better than a record keeper or provider might. A lot of it is blending the messaging, right? So if you think about, I work in marketing, we're constantly looking at and saying what words resonate, which ones don't. For younger employees, focusing on the planning for retirement element of this, for a 27-year-old, retirement is a lifetime and more away. So there's some words to perhaps avoid. And by the way, it starts with the word participant. Participants don't usually know that they're participants. But the other piece of this is weighing it in and making your retirement plan perhaps the hub of other financials. So if you know that you either on your own in your financial wellness programs or through your retirement provider have other financial wellness type things that can be the reason to get them to engage. The question came up earlier about chicken egg. Are people using these tools because they were naturally inclined and therefore they're saving more, or did it happen the other way around? That's yet another way to think about how do you get employees to engage in the retirement plan. It may be by talking to them about things about how do you save for the emergency? Yeah, here's a budgeting tool that you can use to get them to engage in the plan. Hopefully that is the question.
Oh, thank you. There's a question, Lisa. I know I talked about it, but I know you have looked at this many times as well. The confidence levels are pretty high, but when you look at what people have saved, what they've actually prepared for, how do you reconcile those different perspectives?
One part of it's broken, right? Either our respondents, Americans, have false confidence and they carry that false confidence into retirement with them, or maybe to the key finding I think Peter shared, there are people willing to live with less and make other trade-offs in retirement that aren't purely maximizing finances. They want to maximize time. You know, and we've seen retirees are incredibly adaptable with their spending. And so, you know, I think it's reasonable to reevaluate some of the metrics we use, because this study shows us, as I just said, people who retired with way less than we said they were going to need feel like they're doing okay. How is that possible? Right? It needs some work. Some part of the equation isn't right.
I also think that people are pretty much, if you ask them just generally, I think they're pretty positive about life too. when you start then following up with the other questions, I think if you ask the question at the beginning and the end, you might get two different answers when they really have to think about all the things that they have to do to get prepared for retirement. But that really doesn't explain for those that are actually in retirement that they're doing all right. But certainly for workers' expectations, I think those could change as well. So I think we do overall have very positive beliefs of workers in America that, you know, things are going to turn out all right, because in general, most retirees are doing all right for the most part. But, you know, obviously not everyone, but we do have a pretty satisfied retiree population so far. They see that as an example and they think they'll be all right too. So I think there's a lot going on there in that question, and how you frame it when you ask the question relative to all the other issues as well, I think would go into that as well. I had a couple specific questions about the survey. Lisa, you could confirm on this. We did not ask about satisfaction in workplace retirement plan this year. We cycled that out.
We did, but the Ebury Greenwald annual workplace wellness study has a very explicit satisfaction with retirement savings plan question in it. And it's fairly high. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head.
And that survey is just now going in the field and will be out in January.
Correct.
Yes. And also there's a question on what do you think about the increase in the information sources for retirees, indicating that they're using employers? And the one hypothesis is, I'll build upon, is that more retirees seem to be keeping their savings in the plan than we've seen in the past. That's something that plan sponsors have been trying to do, particularly those with larger balances. That helps keep the plan, you know, have more assets in the plan, which helps spread the cost over more. And also they want to take an interest in helping their employees be able to retire successfully. And that goes with looking at the retirement income options. You see more and more discussion about providing information, providing investment options, providing outside of the plan option, annuity options, or whether it's annuities inside the plan. All of that discussion on how we could change these assets to income. And I think that's really something that employers have really, and plan sponsors have really been gunning for. I think, Peter, you might have a perspective on this as well.
Yeah, so in terms of the reasons why, like, you know, what we're starting to see more of is, you know, historically it was just sort of a natural, okay, I'm retired, I take my money out of the plan. Now, and I think this is what you were asking, Craig, was, you know, you see more people, whether it's an in-plan guaranteed income option that might not be available outside, whether it's in-plan advice where people are actually able to get some direction and one-on-one coaching that they, you know, maybe didn't have 10 years ago. I think those all point to the reasons why we're starting to see more folks staying in plan. And to your point, also where a lot of plan sponsors are starting to see the benefit of having retirees keep the money in the plan.
Well, I think we've come to the time. I appreciate Peter and Lisa joining us on this webinar. We have some upcoming activities here for Ebury members. We have the research committee meeting on July 11th. And on July 18th, we have those that are part of our DEI council. We have that meeting. And then on September 26th, we have the Ebury Financial Wellbeing Symposium, which will be live streamed to the public. And there we'll be rolling out the results for our latest financial wellbeing employer survey. So again, thank you all for joining us. One last thing, the slide deck will be sent out to those that registered to attend today. So look for that email so you can get the slides for future use. Thank you all again, and have a good day.